welcome to the New Culture Forum's brand new current affairs show, Widdicombe, Webb and Wobberts. My name is Emma Webb and I'm your host, and I'm delighted to introduce to you the former Shadow Home Secretary and former Brexit Party MEP Anne Widdecombe and comedian Abi Roberts. Anne and Abi will be joining me every show to discuss the madness and mayhem in our politics, news and culture. And if you would like to get in touch and send us questions, please do so in the live stream and we'll discuss them throughout. It's been quite a mad week this week with our failure to win the Euros against Italy, with the imminent so-called Freedom Day, and also with some very interesting new statistics about British attitudes towards wokeism and freedom of speech. So, shall we begin by discussing the football and what we saw recently with particularly attacks on the Home Secretary Priti Patel for what she had previously criticised taking the knee and then condemned the racism after the football. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I thought the attack was completely baseless. I mean, I criticise taking the knee. Doesn't make me a racist. Means that I think it is offensive. I mean, not only stupid, but offensive to actually indulge in a gesture to an organisation which wants to defund the police. I mean, it's just as well we had the police around when there were all those attacks after the football match. You know, just as well we had them around. So any organisation that wants to defund the police and proclaim anarchy, basically, it's not worth taking the knee to. And Priti Patel is fully entitled to say that. And it is in no way contradictory of that to condemn racism. No way.
What do you think, Abi, of footballers that have sort of come out condemning those who have criticised taking the knee, suggesting that they are somehow responsible for the sort of racist abuse that some of the players received after failing to get those penalties in the goal?
Well, I don't know if you heard my sigh when you asked when you came to me. What can I say? Thanks a lot, America, for giving us your politics, you know, wrapped up in a nice bow, marked. You're completely crazy. To you know, a political organisation like BLM that wants to defund the police, you know, end capitalism. Oh, does that sound a bit like communism? Yes, it does. And we should be saying, no, thank you very much. We don't want that in our sport. Yeah. We don't want that in our schools. We don't want that anywhere near us. Yeah. And frankly, if you want to, you know, stop racism, do it in your everyday life. When you come, I mean, how many of these, you know, these liberal lefties with their rainbow flags have actually in their job stood up for somebody who had racism, which I have done. I've lost work. I've lost a job. This is about 20 years ago. A girl that was getting abuse, you know, because she was black. I said, that's enough. And I was fired. And I want people
hang on, why were you fired?
I was fired because I stood up for her.
No, but on what grounds were you fired? They never did it for that. What grounds were you fired?
Oh, well, they said it was because, you know, they said something like, oh, we don't come along and interfere in your job. And I said, yeah, but you were openly being racist to my colleague. So what I'm saying is, rather than doing all this, you know, take the knee, all very well and good, but gesture politics, in your everyday life, treat people as you would like to be treated.
I still say the answer, and I know that, you know, a lot of people don't agree with that, I still say the answer is to be colourblind. I do not notice whether the person I'm talking to is black, white or bright green. I do not notice. As far as I'm concerned, I'm talking to that person as a person.
As a human being, exactly. Yeah. And that's what I thought that's what we all, I thought, hang on a minute, I thought that's what we all were. When we liberals, you know, liberally minded, that's a person, you know, I mean, last year, I remember someone saying to me that Martin Luther King was now no longer relevant.
What?
I guess that's the irony, though, isn't it? Because that's the point that people who have been criticising taking the knee, that's exactly the point they're making. They're saying this is inextricably associated with an organisation and a movement that tells people that the solution is to not be colourblind, to see race. And then the consequence of that is that people do see race. So the whole argument that taking the knee is divisive for that very reason. They don't seem to understand that those positions are coherent, that it's possible for the Home Secretary to condemn racists and also to say taking the knee is divisive. 55% of the British public think Black Lives Matter made racial tensions worse in this country.
It's all about identity politics,
yeah,
you know, and the politics of grievance and the politics of looking for grievance on behalf of other people, not just on your own.
Precisely, and also where's it end? I mean, I tweeted earlier today, maybe slightly unwisely, that maybe women now should, you know, at to basically go against what's happening in trans activism, which is erasing female biology. Maybe women should get down on both knees to
not
show
at my
their
age, dear. Not at my
so I'll help you up. But, for solidarity. Because basically what I'm saying is you take one knee, then you take two knees. I mean, what's next? You'll be lying prostrate on the football pitch. And I frankly say, just get on with playing football and win the World Cup.
We've got a
Yeah.
comment here from a lady called Sharon who says, it's absurd to say that Priti Patel is stoking racism. She's been a victim of racism all her life. She merely opposes this Marxist BLM taking of the knee.
Yeah.
It's interesting because actually Calvin Robinson also this week had hell from Billy Bragg when he did this, I think it was a Channel 4 interview. And Billy Bragg, same suggestion that the people who have been criticising taking the knee now have no right to, cheer on a multiracial team.
It's
and so
absurd. And what's more, we've got to stand up to it. I mean, what worries me about this all the time is that people don't stand up to it. And they're afraid then to speak, and they're afraid to take those positions. Well, that actually is what is at the root of a lot of the trouble. It's that people will not stand up to it. And if people simply turned around and said, rubbish, get a life.
Do you think that the consequence of this is going to be that people will find it harder to criticise taking the knee because now they've made this sort of rhetorical sleight of hand where it's now associated with the racism that they've suffered, and they're saying, well, this was why we were taking the knee in the first place.
Yeah, and I think Billy Bragg, he needs to apologise for all his protest songs because they're the worst. The worst. I don't know if you ever heard them. But,
I'd never even heard of Billy Bragg.
Bob Dylan, he ain't is all I'm going to say about
so
that.
we've got another comment here from Barry who says, why don't football teams just do another non-divisive gesture like linking arms that's nothing to do with BLM? Well, interestingly, Millwall did actually, and it wasn't very reported on. It was very reported on when Millwall booed, the fans booed taking the knee. But apparently earlier this year, Millwall fans actually cheered when the players linked arms and held up a sign that said inequality with the IN slashed out. So it's quite clear that the fans are not booing because they're some racist troglodytes. They're booing because they think that the taking of the knee is associated with Black Lives Matter.
Hate gesture politics.
Yes.
It's not even just the association with Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
It's that you're doing something that is frightfully fashionable and in, but actually what does it mean?
Yes.
What does it
mean in your everyday life? Precisely. And of course we saw all the terrible riots last year in America by BLM protesters, trashing shops and businesses and scaring people and being violent. So we don't want that. We don't want that, association.
Well, actually, interestingly, that leads on to another subject that has been big this week, and that is the study from the Centre for Policy Studies, where the famous, legendary pollster Frank Luntz, he found that, or set out a sort of prophetic warning that we have imported our identity politics from the US, something I think that we all knew.
We have.
But he did a deep dive with some polling and focus groups into the minds of the British public to see what their views were on this. It's quite interesting. I've got some of the stats here. He found that apparently 38% of the British public don't actually know what woke means. And over a third know nothing about cancel culture.
They're lucky.
However, he also found that 57% of 18 to 29-year-olds think that Britain is institutionally racist.
Sorry, 15%?
No.
57%.
57%?
And this is particularly interesting for free speech. 28% of people had stopped talking to another person because online or in person because of views that they hold. But amongst 18 to 29-year-olds, it was 52%. So more than half of millennials have stopped talking to someone because of their political views. So his warning was that, as you say, Abby, we've imported this dangerous way of thinking from the United States.
And they're happy to admit it. They've not only done it, but they're happy to admit that they've done it.
It's become completely normalised in my generation, I guess.
Normalised to, well, and also, let's be honest, I was thinking today, it's weird looking at Cuba running away from communism, and the West seems to be running towards it. and implementing all the things that we were terrified by in Mao's China. You know, the denouncing, the not speaking to somebody because, oh my goodness, I don't want to be seen speaking to them because that might mean I get a knock on the door to take me away. I mean, people say, oh, but you're just being over dramatic. No, not really, because that's how it all starts. You know.
I mean, what it's about is totalitarianism. It's about the suppression of free speech. So, no, we're not going to have police on the doorstep to throw us into the Lubyanka. But we can have police on the doorstep to query what we've said and what was behind our thinking.
And
it actually has happened.
Yeah. And our neighbours as well, saying, well, we saw her doing whatever she's doing. You know, we might want to report her. I mean, that's not the UK that I want to live in. Yeah, the snitching.
No.
So we've got a question here from Marcus who asks, is Britain doomed if the majority of young people are embracing woke values? How can the tide be turned?
Well, it's doomed if we sit back and do nothing about it.
Yeah.
If all we do is wring our hands and say it's disgusting and, you know, it's not going to get us anywhere. We've actually got to stand up to it. Now, one of the things that I think we can be pleased about, there are signs we're doing that. I mean, you know, GB News has come along, the New Culture Forum has come along. And there are actually signs that Toby Young's free speech, there are actually signs that there is now a kickback against it. But we don't need to give up. And we really need to be brave about this. And people need to be brave about this in their places of work and to say, no, with all due respect, that's rot.
And we do, and I'm ashamed to say as a comedian that maybe me and maybe two other comedians are very vocally. I mean, I'm known as the woke finder general amongst my friends, and I talk radio. Here she comes, quick, hide. But, oh no, don't hide. Actually, just keep speaking, because obviously that would be a bit weird if I was trying to cancel them as well. But I'm very, very shocked that there are not more people in the arts, particularly comedy, because it sort of likes to push back because authority. And rightly so. I am amazed that there are not more people willing to say, well, I don't agree with that. You know, so I am Spartacus. No, I'm Spartacus. Where are the other Spartacuses?
Well, probably Spartacus got crucified there. And I think that people are just afraid of what's going to happen.
Yeah, but I mean, let's be honest. Okay, that's an extreme version. I wouldn't be, suggesting that, but for myself, obviously. But I was thinking this the other day, is that when someone said to me, "Oh, but people might lose their job, or they might, you might get bad reviews in a comedy show," I'm like, do you know that men like Solzhenitsyn went,
yes.
"Take me to the gulag.
Yes.
Take me to the gulag."
And they did.
And they did. Take me to the gulag. We shouldn't be laughing about this, Anne. Come on, it's a serious topical show. And they took him to the gulag, and he was there saying, this is for freedom, it's worth doing this because of who comes after me.
But you see,
generation who come after me.
Solzhenitsyn and Sakharov, if you remember the physicist, Andrei Sakharov, they, if you like to put it another way, got away with it because of who they were. Because they had big names, because they had huge international reputations. But if you were Mr. or Mrs. Ordinary Russian,
yes,
nobody was going to stand up for you.
If you were Ivan Denisovich.
Oh.
I'm
glad you can say it, I can't.
Ivan Denisovich, Russian's my second language. But anyways, moving to... we'll talk about that later. But, I say to people, what have you got to lose? I mean, you've got a lot to lose, but really? I mean, on balance... we're talking about...
Do you think maybe the tide is turning against this worldview?
No, I don't think it's turning, but I think, as I said just now, there are signs of a pushback. And we've really got to keep the momentum going behind that pushback, and everybody's got to do it. It's no good to use my Solzhenitsyn and Sakharov analogy, just the big people doing it.
Yes.
Everybody's got to do it.
Everyone's got to join in. Agreed.
Sanjeev asks, isn't the core problem our education system? So is that something that, obviously it's actually quite interesting from the Centre for Policy Studies research. He found that young people were actually more likely to think that the country was institutionally racist than non-white British people. So suggesting that that is something that is coming from our education system, that we're educating people to view society in this way. What do you think, in answer to Sanjeev's question, is the core problem our education system? Is there something we can do with the education system to try and
Well, what we know
back?
Is that if teachers do push back against it and try to give a balanced view and invite pupils to comment, we do know that the next thing is they're in trouble, there are protests, And so it's actually, it needs quite a lot of courage. If you're just one teacher in a very big system, it needs quite a lot of courage, but it is what we need. And this is the long march through the institutions. It's where we are now. That march has taken place. We've got people at the head of all institutions now, or in positions of huge influence in all institutions now, who do not take our view, who take the view that there is only one right answer.
Yes.
Now, the essence of university teaching in my day was there are many answers and you can decide between them, but there are many answers, never any just one right answer.
Yeah. And that is, it's very worrying. I would say that God, where are the unions when you need them? The teachers' unions, that's going to be offensive to your ears. You've got the unions, but seriously, where are all the blooming teachers? Just when teachers' unions are needed, they're all scurrying. They're all in the staff room, hiding behind the settee. They should be out saying, no, this is not acceptable. Like you said, education is a range of views. And
how to think.
Education
is about rigor and thought and
not
analysis.
What to think, how to think.
And the situation in Batley is a perfect example of the fact that even when teachers have attempted to, speak out during the Batley and Spen by-election, that none of the main candidates were willing to say anything other than a kind of mealy-mouthed
deadly
response.
silence. I mentioned it in my Express column. Very good column, by the way, every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday. You don't mention it.
No.
But it's true, Batley and Spen. Who would have thought that there's a campaign raising money for the teacher because nobody else was willing to help. So the public, I think, has raised something like 60 grand now, which I think is wonderful. So if only we could have that part, the public, doing more.
Silent minority is silent. That's the problem.
The
silent majority is silent.
They need to speak up.
The main resistance in Batley came from the bin men. The bin men of Batley, you mentioned the unions, were the ones who were pushing back against it. The British people would be behind this.
The bin men.
Well, the bin men and this teacher. But isn't it outrageous that it's been months and this teacher is still in hiding, fearing for his life with his family?
Well, he ought to come out.
In modern Britain.
He ought to come out of hiding now.
Yeah, and we talk about gesture politics taking over the airwaves. What about a teacher who's scared for his life? He's got a fatwa on his head. Let's not kind of mince words here. The Salman Rushdie thing, this is what's happening to this teacher. So, the fact that, we're folks so obsessed with these kind of, gestures and, oh, you said this, and did you really mean this? When there's a man in hiding, I think says a lot, don't you, about where we are?
As I say, he should come out of hiding now.
Yeah.
Come out of hiding and face it down. Yeah. Face it down.
So Maggie asks, she says, the Centre for Policy Studies said that people are fed up with big business as well as politics. Are these woke corporations damaging their brand?
Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? I can say all the corporations are so woke, I'm surprised that anybody's against them who's woke.
Who's woke, yes, exactly. Again, we come back to the free market. It's like, well, maybe... these institutions, what they're going to find out, aren't they? Because people don't want to buy their stuff. They
stop banking with Barclays or eating Ben and Jerry's ice cream.
Yeah.
But it only needs a handful of people, it seems to me, on Twitter to protest. Yeah. And immediately, the boards of all these big companies are bowing down to them. Instead of just saying, go and get a life, dear.
Do you think this is partly the Twitterification of real life, that all of these corporations think that Twitter is the real world, even though the majority of people are probably not on any form of social media at all?
I think it's just instantaneous panic, basically, and it's panic on the part of whoever's picking up the phone and dealing with public relations on the day. And I'm quite certain that's what happened in the IKEA case with GB News. I'm certain that's what happened there, that somebody picked up the phone, answered it, thought, this is terrible, yes, we're going to review it, because he thought that was the safest thing to say. Yeah. And of course it wasn't. And IKEA very quickly backed off. But they only backed off because there was a backlash.
Yes.
There has to be a backlash.
There has to be a backlash. But you're right that in those businesses and institutions, there are in place that little, the Long March, the what do you call the useful idiots and the setting suns, I think of them as, that are there, and they've got their little sort of hooks in. And I think that's what we're fighting against, isn't it?
Charles Moore recently said in his Spectator column that the National Trust, apparently some whistleblower, a member of staff from the National Trust, said that during their interviews they actually ask the way in which the candidate voted in the referendum, and if they say Brexit, then they don't get the job.
They asked
Yeah.
that. Well,
Apparently.
any candidate with any guts would say, none of your business, mate. That's what I would say. None of your business. Secret ballot. None of your business.
Yeah.
How dare you ask me?
Yeah, exactly. More people need to.
Shall I go to the Daily
that.
Mail and tell them you asked me?
Yes.
I mean, come
Yeah.
on.
Yeah,
So
it's true.
Rob says, nice sentiment from Abby, but 9 out of 10 university academics are now left-wing and fewer than 10% of school teachers vote Tory. They are the problem, not the solution.
Nice sentiment. I haven't heard that for a long time. 9 out of 10. Well, yeah. What can I say? I think we need to build new institutions. Then,
I think
we either have to drain the swamp.
I actually think we need to use law, and I very rarely say that
Yeah.
because I don't think if it moves, legislate. I just don't think that at all. But I think this is an occasion, and we're doing it, of course, for the universities. We're actually making law now that says you have to guarantee free speech.
Yeah.
And I think similarly in schools, obliged by Ofsted, and therefore obliged in turn by government specification, they should have to look at all sides of an issue. That is what they should be doing, and they should be taught, as you say, not what to think, but how to think. Rigor. I mean, in my day, they were so rigorous.
Yes.
And my day was so long ago.
What are your thoughts, Abby, on the higher education freedom of speech bill? Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing?
Yes.
I think it's a fab thing. I think it's wonderful.
I think it's
No
great.
pressure.
No pressure. I mean, I think it's wonderful, but the fact that we have to legislate to have free speech in our institutions is it's a little bit worrying. But no, I mean, I like I said, as many views as possible in the sunlight. Let's have a look at them, and any ones we find distasteful, we can go, well, I don't really like that. We might have to revisit that.
It's interesting that one of the criticisms, they say it will put a sort of a burden on universities, a burden of bureaucracy and so on, without recognising that this is absolutely central to the functioning of a university.
Yes.
If you can't have a free exchange of ideas, that's why I think when people have criticised the bill because they say that that it will add this extra burden of bureaucracy, that it will create a culture of complaint when we already have a culture of complaint in universities.
So. Yeah.
That the solution is not to legislate. The solution is to argue within the university settings for free speech, for academic freedom. But you can't actually argue for those things unless you legislate in order to protect a space in which people can argue.
Which people can argue, exactly. Otherwise, you're shut down if you say we want free speech, or shut up, and then that's the end of that argument. Yeah.
I know. I mean, the arguments against it on those grounds are specious. I mean, they're just being made because nobody actually wants to say, I don't believe in free speech. And so they introduce bureaucracy and there's this reason and there's that reason. What those people actually mean is they don't believe in free speech. They believe their view should be the preferred view.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
So while we're on the topic of authoritarian drift...
Nice segue, darling.
Freedom Day, so-called Freedom Day on the 19th. Is it going to happen? Will it be a real Freedom Day?
Can I just say, who'd have thought in 2021 in the United Kingdom we'd have Freedom Day? I mean, this
the day when you get some of your civil liberties back.
Thank you so much. We had to doff our caps as we watch the tanks roll by, with Boris Johnson with a huge moustache. But I mean, I just think the Freedom Day. What are we doing when didn't we have that last month, June the 21st? Wasn't that sort of nearly Freedom Day, and now it's going to be Freedom Day?
No, it's not going to be Freedom Day. The one before was nearly Freedom Day. This is now nearly Freedom Day.
Nearly.
But it's not really going to be Freedom Day because they've already backtracked on possibly having more.
It would be Freedom Day if they stuck to what Boris actually said when he announced it, which was, you must use your own judgment. And he used the analogy that I used in the Express every Wednesday, very good column. He used exactly the same analogy, which is that there is a difference between a rammed tube train and an empty railway carriage. And therefore, we should be able to be allowed to use our common sense. If he'd put a full stop there, that was fine. But ever since then, he's gone on elaborating as to what decisions we should make and handing the power to individual organisations to decide what decisions we should make.
Yeah.
So, if that's freedom, I'm a Dutchman.
Yeah. Exactly.
What do you
That's
think?
probably racist, actually.
How dare you? But also handing the power to Susan, what's her name, Michie, I don't know, who is, a communist. Thank you, Richard Madeley, for asking that question, which was, I thought was a great question to ask when he interviewed her. But also Sage. So you've got a person, you're right, you're handing the decisions to somebody who quite likes the idea of people not having that much freedom.
Well, it
Let's be
may
honest.
not only be Susan Mickey or Mitchie, however you say her name, who thinks that.
Apologies,
because apparently, according to a YouGov poll, 71% of the English people support a delay.
Oh,
Two-thirds of Brits plan to keep wearing masks. An Ipsos Mori poll found that 19% support a nationwide curfew at 10 p.m. permanently.
Who are they asking?
35% said that they would have
gone around the asylums.
they would have a 10-day quarantine period after travelling abroad forever, and 1 in 4 want nightclubs and casinos to be permanently closed.
Oh my God, the
Apparently.
Puritans are back.
Do you think those polls are fair? Do you think that is actually what the British people think?
I think a lot of people want to go. I don't know about some of the others, but I think a lot of people want to go on wearing masks. But my view is that's fine. Let them.
Yeah.
As long as I don't have to.
Yeah.
As long as we really can make our own judgments,
Yes,
given
exactly.
the situation around us. I mean, I don't mind wearing them in hospitals. That is a judgment which I would concur with.
Yes.
But I do not want to be told by the people who want to wear masks that I should have to wear one.
Yes, precisely. And also, I think with this mask thing, this is what worries me. Again, we're back to the Boris Johnson handing over, responsibility, because they've said you can sort of choose. Well, guess what? The mask fetishists, because that's what they are. I've seen people with masks that match their clothing. I'm like, that's like matching your lipstick to your Guantanamo Bay jumpsuit. For heaven's sake, what are we doing here? This is madness. What we're going to have is we're going to have people who love wearing masks, and then me and Anne and you and everyone watching who won't be wearing masks. So
I'm going to plagiarise that comment.
You're going to
Thank
you, darling.
Plagiarise
Thank you.
it. Yep.
Oh, great! At last, my work is going to be out there.
What do you think of the fact that, you mentioned U-turns or Boris saying one thing and then reality being otherwise.
Yeah.
It seemed that they weren't going to go ahead with the vaccine passports. Then they started talking about this NHS app, which looked like it was a vaccine passport by the back door. And now they're saying that they advise large venues to use a form of vaccine certification. And this is quite interesting. They actually said that, and this is a direct quote, if sufficient measures are not taken to limit infection, then the vaccine passports could become mandatory. So they're basically saying that come Freedom Day, the restrictions are lifted. But if you don't continue to voluntarily enforce them, then we will deprive you of your civil liberties by having vaccine passports.
Yeah.
And apparently the reason why, according to a government source, the reason why they want to have this vaccine certification is actually to try and, I'd say encourage, what I mean is coerce, young people into having the vaccine,
Of course.
regardless of the fact that 9 in 10 adults have antibodies regardless if they've had the vaccine or not. So they want to coerce the young into having the vaccine. So one of these government sources, again, this is a direct quote, said, if we can show real benefits of getting vaccinated in terms of everyday life, then it could be quite a useful tool. So what they're really saying is that it could be quite useful to us if we deprive people of their civil liberties so that they do exactly what we want in order to get those civil liberties back.
That's essentially what's happening.
Yeah, I think they're doing something slightly more subtle than that, to be fair. Let me take two analogies. One with CCTV cameras. Now, you're far too young to remember, and I suspect you are too. But when CCTV cameras, and I was in government at the time, so I remember very sharply, when they started coming out, there was huge resistance to them, and people said they're the spy in the sky, and certain councils said they'd never have them and refused to have them, blah, 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 blah. Then we had the horrible murder of Jamie Bulger, and we had those images of the CCTV who actually managed to film the 2 boys who were taking him out. And suddenly everybody said, oh, it's got a purpose. And we couldn't, quite suddenly, government couldn't afford all the demand that was coming in for CCTV. Another one, again, you won't remember. We used to have a thing called bank check guarantee card, so that if you wrote a check, you had to present this card. And some people said, I'm not having one of those. My name on my check is good enough. And the bank said, okay, you don't have to have them. But it became so impossible to pass a check without one that just about everybody with an account had one. Now, I think they're trying something similar here. They're saying, okay, you don't have to. You don't have to have the vaccination, but if you do, and if you have a certificate, it's going to bring you benefits. Now, actually, I don't object to that anything like as much as I would object if they said, you've got to have a vaccine. I really don't object to it. I do not object to an incentive.
But if they're making life so impossible that you can't partake
You're not
in
making
any
life impossible, so you can't go into a nightclub without one. Well, that doesn't make my life remotely
or a
impossible.
restaurant or a pub, inevitably, because Ross, I think his name is Ross Clark, he wrote brilliant article in the Telegraph, I think it was today, about the direction of travel, like you say, with the CCTV cameras, where it ends up going.
It's towards vaccination,
that
but
it's
still voluntary.
He thinks that this is drifting in the direction of having electronic ID cards, and he joked that about going into a theatre and saying, "Well, sir, your seat is number 10, but let me just have a look at your ID to check whether or not you said anything on social media that we find distasteful."
Yeah.
Whether it is going to drift in the sort of
scoring.
the Chinese CCP style social credit system, that this will become some kind of permanent electronic ID.
Look, I don't think we need to go too far down the conspiracy theory route. I mean, I think that is always a danger. I object to the curtailment of liberty, but there's always a danger that you will go down some 1984 route, and you'll see things that are going to happen in the future, which probably aren't going to happen at all. I think, I carry a vaccination certificate when I go to Ethiopia. I have to be vaccinated against yellow fever. I do not object. I had to be vaccinated in the old days, not now, against cholera for many countries.
Yeah.
I did not object. I don't object to having to show in certain circumstances that I have had something which is required. I know I'm a lone voice in this gathering, but I think as long as it's not made compulsory, if all they're doing is producing incentives, I really don't have a problem.
Yeah. My one slight issue with that is with, obviously I'm not a doctor, I haven't got medical knowledge, but yellow fever and things like Japanese encephalitis and all those, cholera.
Oh, I haven't been vaccinated against that.
Have you not had the Japanese? It's wonderful, I highly recommend it. Just plot that disease out of my head. I have read in medical journals the argument, which is that the reason that, even those vaccinations are not mandatory. You'd be a fool to go to a country and not have yellow fever or cholera or Japanese encephalitis.
You can't enter Ethiopia without a certificate.
But the difference is, those diseases, if you get them, will likely kill you. Whereas COVID-19, with this virus we're talking about, will likely not kill you.
That's international travel rather than domestic.
Overwhelmingly, statistically, won't kill you.
Yes, exactly. Overwhelmingly, statistically. So that's my problem with all this, is that we seem to be hitting a little tiny little pin with an enormous mallet.
And if it's about...
It's called a sledgehammer and a nut.
Sledgehammer and a nut, thank you very much. Thank you for saving that. Saving that analogy.
If you're making a risk assessment, though, if, as I say, 9 out of 10 people have antibodies, then what is the purpose of having a vaccine passport if the risk to those who are vaccinated is so small from the unvaccinated? I think it's a question of your medical privacy, right? Because this is about setting a precedent of having a certification that shares your medical information.
That's the door we're opening.
With companies.
That's the Orwellian door.
Are you not worried that sets a dangerous precedent?
Yeah, because so much has happened over the last... for me personally, so much has happened, not personally, but just sort of viewing it as a sort of outsider, so much has happened that we wouldn't have thought would happen. That's why I'm more trepidatious, if that's even a word, than Anne is, about the not looking ahead and thinking, hang on a minute, because who would have thought, who'd have thought that somewhere like Canada would be burning churches in 2021, but here we are. So my argument is, maybe we should start having a little look at what potentially could be down the road.
Just as I have criticised the government throughout for disproportionality, that's what I've criticised them for. I think now your fears are becoming disproportionate.
You think?
Yeah, I do. And
what happens if they're not? What have I got to lose by having those serious concerns, which I see people who are not, the Moth Raving Loony Party.
You are very welcome to your serious concerns. I do not wish to curtail your free speech.
Yes.
I merely wish to say that I think that just as I believe the government and the scientists got things out of proportion, you are now getting things out of proportion.
Yeah. even though we've had promises that have been gone back on.
Oh, that's new in
our Prime
politics.
Minister.
That's new in politics, is it? People
Well,
going back on their
I mean,
promises.
when they've been, well, but,
where have you been living for the last 2 decades?
But I mean,
It goes with the territory of being in politics. Oh,
Now,
I never
we're
thought,
running
though,
to the end of the
I
show
never
now.
thought, I fight to win. But after 16 months, seriously, 16 months of this authoritarian regime we've had, I think I could be allowed for being a little bit hot under the. If I had a collar, but I haven't. I'm wearing a rather revealing
yes, thank you.
sweetheart neckline, which I know you've had your eye on, Anna. But I'm trying to what's the word? Yes.
What a way to end the show. Final word, Anne. Final words. Final reflections.
Look, freedom is important, but so is proportionality. And I think that the government has got it wrong and is getting it wrong again because they're effectively handing the power that the law had to individual organisations to decide just according to them what is going to happen. I think it should come back to what Boris originally said, which is wholly within the discretion of the individual. That is what I think should happen. That to me would be proportionate and would be actually trusting grown-ups to use their own savvy.
And on that note, folks, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Anne and Abby. And please join us next week and subscribe in the bar below. Thanks very much.